So anyway, I would like, this is Pam Neighbors here at CareerSource Central Florida, and I would like to welcome John Crossman to our podcast today. Welcome, John.
Thank you, Pam. It's an honor to be with you.
So I have this wonderful, amazing list of little facts about you, John. So I'm just going to
Cool.
pick and choose a few, but you are an incredible force in, I would say, Florida as well as Central Florida, and maybe many different leadership and real estate industries. But John Crossman is the former president of CrossMarc Services, a real estate advisory brokerage and investment firm operating in Central Florida. He is also a very active speaker and writer on a national scale and has been featured in the Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, Associated Press, Business Journals, and CBS News. He's also been named one of Florida Trend's 500 most influential business leaders. I know that he is extraordinarily passionate about diversity in education. He serves as executive board member for both Florida State University for Real Estate Education and the University of Florida Bergstrom Center for Real Estate. And he's a trustee at Bethune-Cookman University and also serves on two boards at Florida A&M. Wow. Do you have any private or personal time left in your day? One thing I know I want to talk to you a little bit about is your book, which is Career Killers and Career Builders.
Mhm.
He's also established 6 different college scholarships and worked extensively to create real estate programs, specifically looking at historically Black colleges and universities. And like me, he is a fellow podcaster. He actually has 2 podcasts that he does, the Crossman Conversation and the Crossman Conversation CEO edition. So, John, since you are a podcaster and I'm a podcaster, I'm going to assume that you also listen to other podcasts. So, tell me about your favorite couple of podcasts that you listen to, either for professional reasons or personal reasons.
Well, listen, there's first off, thanks for the show. There's all kinds of stuff I listen to, and I listen to for different reasons, right? And so there's sometimes people I like to listen to because I want to be inspired, and then there's other kinds of people I listen to that I kind of want to escape. And so I'm going to pick one of those. It's just a little obscure,
Sounds good.
but I really enjoy the comedian Dana Gould, and
Mm-hmm.
he has a lot of jokes that are history related. And they're not like direct. It's called like it's alternative comedy, but I just find him kind of unique and different and kind of inspirational. So it's not like a straight up comedy show, but it's different. And
Mm-hmm.
when I'm trying to look to just kind of escape, I just enjoy his style. And it's funny if you were to watch his very off the wall kind of goofy interviews, they inspire me when I do my podcast. I've actually used some of his material. It's inspired me in how I do some of my things I do.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, I love that. I am definitely going to look that up. I also know you are an amazing history buff. And I like to listen to American History Hit or just History Hit. Do you have any of those? Like, I know you've got interest in all kinds of history, and listening to some of your podcasts, I know one passion is also military history and World War II and such. Any other for leisure perhaps that you listen to or to learn?
It's funny. I like to float around. Like I kind of like go into different stuff. It's like there'll be something that gets in my head and I'll go into this deep dive. And I'm going to tell you one that's controversial. Okay. Are you
Oh,
ready?
okay.
All right. So I recently did this deep dive into the President Kennedy assassination. And I'm going
Yes.
to tell you after my deep dive and researching, this is my crazy conclusion. I think Lee Harvey Oswald killed him. That's
Yeah,
my
yeah.
conclusion.
I think after all of these years, I think you're right.
Well, what's
You're
funny is so
right.
when one so again, this is recently. It's like last weekend. I was going
Yep.
this down the rabbit hole, deep dive, and I
Hmm.
learned something I never knew, and that Lee Harvey Oswald had a brother, and they picked him up. The police picked him up that day, and they said, we believe your brother killed President Kennedy, and his brother said, yeah, of course he did. And his whole
Wow.
life, he was always like, yeah, my brother did it. And it's so funny, like how that doesn't get reported on. Side note, where was President Kennedy going when he got assassinated? Do you know this? Do you know where the car was going?
So he had just come from a chamber meeting in Dallas,
Mhm.
breakfast. He had been at a
Yep.
chamber breakfast. Was he going to meet with Dallas officials at City Hall?
No, he was going
No.
to the Trade Mart. And if you listen to the reel, it says President Kennedy was going to the Trade Mart. So had he gone to the Trade Mart, the person that would have shook his hand and introduced him to the crowd was Mr. Trammell Crow. And I worked for Trammell Crow and I got to meet Trammell
Wow.
Crow. And so that's part
Wow.
of that. I always like that touch point of history. Like a few years ago, I got to meet with Mrs. Greenspun, who was a Holocaust survivor. She's still alive, lives in Central Florida. But I always
Mhm.
like those moments in life when you get to touch history and kind of really absorb it. And so that was just like a physical kind of touch point to that event. So it's kind of crazy.
That is an amazing story. I love that. And I agree with you. It's very cool when you meet somebody who has that touch point. Just recently I learned my VP of HR and our chief of staff actually her grandfather worked on the Manhattan Project
What?
and yeah, in the one in the east that was in, I believe, Kentucky. And
Hmm.
so, yeah, another one of those incredible touch points. So history is an amazing connection between us. And also, I mean, history has inspired my career journey. Tell us a little bit about your career journey. Like, what did you think you wanted to be as a child, and how did you end up where you worked a lot of your career in real estate and development. So tell us a little bit about that, John.
Yeah, sure. So my dad was a pastor and civil rights leader, and they've done research on pastors' kids, and pastor kids typically outperform doctors' kids and lawyers' kids. And so I think the reason why that is when you're a pastor's kid, you grow up in an educated household, you grow up in a household that's very community focused,
Mhm.
and it's typically lower income. I used to say poor. My mom said, "Stop saying poor. We we live by faith, you know." And so I, as a kid, if you remember the TV show Family Ties and
Yes.
Alex P. Keaton, I
Hmm.
was like, that's what I want. I had these parents who were very much, community minded people, which I admire and I still admired. But I was like, I want to become a devout capitalist, and not that being materialistic, but knowing that I didn't really like having lower income or life, but also being able to have influence. And so when I went to FSU, I was a finance major and I ended up switching to real estate. I did not learn this till my 40s, but I'm dyslexic. And so if you can imagine all the way through high school and college, I
Wow.
always had friends that were smart, but I always felt like I was dumb because school was so hard. But I think that was part of the connection to real estate is it being physical. I could sort of get my brain around it better than like portfolio management. So got into real estate. I knew I wanted to work in a commission job. I knew I wanted to work a lot of hours. And so got into that. And that's what I've done vocationally for 32 years. As I got into it, because I came from a background that was very diverse, I then
Hmm.
was this industry that was not diverse. And so as I really got into it, that's that connection point. So sometimes people might think, well, why is John a business real estate guy, but he really likes diversity? You're like, well, it's because that's who I am. That's part of like who I am and my ethos as far as a person.
That's amazing. And maybe this would be a good time for you to tell us a little bit about the Crossman Bridge.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so my dad was given the nickname the Bridge Builder going back to 1970 for his work getting the Black and white community together. He then
Mhm.
later in South Florida he worked with the Jewish and Christian community. So he was always in that space of really trying to get people work together. And you know what's funny, Pam? I meet people today that will talk about bridge building, and then as soon as I say another group, they're like, "Oh, not them." And it's like, guys, that's not bridge building. Like if you're bridge
Wow.
building
Yeah.
it's not uniting all of your friends against somebody. It's trying to figure out the place to work together. I've actually been invited to events that were diversity or inclusion events. And I've said, well, why don't we include those people? And they're like, no, we don't include those people. Well, what's the point? So anyway, so that was my dad's nickname and all the work he did. And so he passed away about 20 years ago.
Mhm.
But about 6 years ago, a group of Democrats and Republicans, yay, working
Yay.
together,
Yay. Bipartisan. Yes.
yep, named an actual bridge after him. And so it's actually in Maitland. You can Google this, but the Reverend Kenneth C. Crossman Bridge is named after my dad for his work. And it's funny because that was in a time in our country where people were tearing down statues and building walls, and all of a sudden, a little known pastor that a lot of people didn't hear about we're going to name a bridge after him. So that was pretty cool. So that we really value that moving forward. And in my career, I'm very conservative. I always tell me I'm the most conservative guy in the room. That said, I've been appointed 4 times by politicians to serve in different ways, and 2 of them were Democrats and 2 Republicans. And I like
Mhm.
that. I like that Democrats have appointed me to things because I think it speaks to what we want to be about is getting community to work together.
And I think what you're expressing is really, what I think Americans want.
Yeah.
People who are leaders and politicians to actually, I think most people do want, to have both perspectives and to have some kind of compromise and work towards the betterment of the community. It just seems sometimes to get lost in the noise, right? That
Sure.
maybe is better for getting clicks
Yeah.
on internet. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So, of course, where I am also incredibly interested to hear is what, you wrote a book,
Mhm.
Career Killers, Career Builders. I have been in the career development space all of my working life, really. I started in education and then continued into, literally doing career counseling and eventually became a leader in the workforce arena. But you actually targeted this book towards millennials, right? What inspired you to write this book, and what is the important messaging as a part of it?
So when I got into real estate when I was 21, and when I was
Mhm.
21, I looked like I was 15, right? I was Doogie Howser before it was Doogie Howser. And I got a level of success and when I was 24, 25, and I still looked like a kid. And so what happened was is that colleges and universities started asking me to come guest lecture about how to get into real estate and started. So again, I've been guest lecturing a long time, and I would go to UF or FSU or wherever, and I would give lectures about how to get a career in real estate, things like that. And I still do that. But one time I was driving to UF to give a lecture, and I was thinking about these kids. And I'm like, they're all straight A students and they're superstars. I don't know that I need to talk about cap rates or interest rates or something like that. A lot of people can lecture on that. What's the deep advice I really need to go into? And I started thinking about 10 years of now, like if their average age is 22, when they're 32, what their lives going to look like. And as
Mhm.
I started unpacking that, I started reflecting on during the Great Recession, 5 different people I knew committed suicide. Like,
Wow,
wow.
that's
And
very
you and I
sad.
could spend a whole time here talking
Mhm.
about, Kate Spade or Anthony Bourdain or
Yeah.
Aaron Hernandez. We could just rattle off people that you're like, gosh, they were the best ever blank, best ever blank, best blank. And they took their own lives. And you're like, how does that happen? And even in a less dramatic way, how does somebody go bankrupt or, go through 4 divorces or, or something where you're like, that could not have been by design. So that's what hit me to write a speech that was called the top 5 ways to get fired and the top 5 ways to keep from being fired.
Mhm.
And when I wrote this speech, I didn't write in the context of like, don't be late to work. I wrote like, don't have sex with your coworkers, like especially if they're married to somebody else, right? And I talked
Right.
about like, don't do cocaine. Like I started going into this space of really hard stuff. And then when I talked about ways to prevent it, I started talking about, go see a professional counselor, right? My wife and I were talking about this recently that we know somebody that they now have been accused of like, stealing, embezzling $50,000 from a
Mm.
nonprofit. And we're like, how does that happen? How does somebody you're going your life and then committing a felony? Like, well, at some point something's happening, and instead of committing the crime or having the affair or doing the drugs, see a counselor, get the resources you need. So here's the funny thing, Pam. I'm a real estate guy, right?
Mhm.
The speech about the drugs and alcohol and sex, boy, that's what they kept asking me to do. Like they don't want to hear about real estate. They want to hear about that. So that became my most popular speech. And
Uh-huh.
so I took that speech and turned it into a book. And in target marketing, I don't like when people write books and they say it's for anybody or everybody. I really try to look at the generation below me, and so I target millennials. It could be for a bigger group, and the people that employ them. And I really try to like sort of push into having those hard conversations. And I was talking about mental health a long time ago,
Yeah.
and just like I was talking about diversity a long time ago,
Yeah.
and those are topics I don't really care what other people do, but that's kind of the space I like to play in, and we'll keep talking
Mhm.
about it. And
Mhm.
younger people are really good about talking about it, so that's been great.
Yes, I think that, one thing the millennial generation does do well is talk about what they want and their feelings,
Yeah,
to your point about people who become successful and then somehow seem to, it seems like they self-sabotage their careers, is that I also think it gets lonely. I know you're a big mental health proponent, but particularly in leadership ranks, it is very lonely to move to the top or into an executive position, because you now have the weight of that organization day in and day out. And you may weigh that in your mind as to what is okay and what is not okay. That could sometimes yield what you talked about, where people might excuse themselves or dismiss themselves from doing something that really is not ethical or wrong. I've seen that happen in my experience in my career in workforce development. I've known a few workforce directors that have skated and even moved over the edge of what is ethical or what is actually criminal. And you wonder why, because these, to your point, are brilliant people,
Yeah.
very established in their career. But mental health and your commitment to understanding that is really commendable. And to your point, back to the millennial generation, they definitely do talk about their feelings. I've got a couple of those in as my children. And they are about that balance of work and life, probably more so than my generation, the boomer generation. Maybe even you're probably a Gen X,
Hmm.
the X generation. But I'm interested. What were two of the top five things not to do to get fired,
One
besides
was,
besides the three you mentioned?
you picked the fun ones. One of those would be pride.
Right. Yes.
Pride, and sometimes when somebody's been a straight A student their whole life and they're used to getting straight A's, life is not about getting straight A's, right? Like when I was at the Trammell Crow Company, we hadn't done reviews in years, and so we had self reviews, and then we did review process, and all of our top best employees reviewed themselves as needs to improve. All of our worst employees that we're about to fire gave themselves outstanding. And so that's a big concept that, like in life, no one makes straight A's in life. That doesn't work that way. And so pride is a major, major career killer
Mm. Mhm.
because people just don't, sometimes they just don't want the coach. I can help you if you want the coaching. I can help you. If you don't want the coaching, there's not a whole lot I can do. But
Yes.
that would be kind of the bigger one, you know. I'd also say this that as I was coming up, and Pam, think you could really relate to this, is that I remember being young. I was like 32, and I was in a men's Bible study, and I was telling a story about my life,
Mhm.
and no one responded, and I was like, hmm. And so later on, I talked to a guy one off, and he said, well, we felt like you were name dropping, and I was like, huh. And me growing up in churches, like you're in community and you just talk about what's going on, I
Mhm.
had to learn discernment because like if somebody were to ask me, John, how was your day? And I'd be like, oh geez, I got this thing, I gotta meet with this politician, I gotta deal with this big issue, or I've gotta approach this CEO about this major deal. Well, I used to think, well, people in my circle, I just tell those things to. I've had to learn like you don't, because maybe they can't really deal with that.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so that's like counseling taught me, and the having safe relationship. I have to think in your job. Sometimes if somebody said, "What'd you do today?" You're like, "Well," and you have to think through. You can't just tell everybody what you did today. You have to
No,
have
no,
discernment on
you're
that.
right. Discernment is a great skill. It is not easy to learn in a class, to your point, and it takes experience, I think, and you have to watch people who do it well, and but it is extraordinarily important. To your point, your audience thought you were name dropping, and you were just actually talking about the different aspects of your day. I find myself this is generational, John. I find myself telling stories about things that I learned or knew about when I was growing up, or as I started in my career, and I'll have blank stares, because literally the people, millennials or generation, the Y generation below them, have no background or concept of what I'm talking about. So discernment for me these days comes in thinking about, okay, like what is the age of this audience, and what stories can I actually tell them that will resonate, or get that communication point across. So I love discernment. That is really, really cool.
Hey,
So tell me, go ahead.
I'm just telling you a quick story. So I have an intern working right now. He's a student at UCF, and I just adore her. And she's 21 years old. She's
Hmm.
originally from Bosnia, came to the States when she was 5. So I had that exact same experience where I would reference a movie or a TV show, and she's like, I don't know what that
Yeah.
is. Like, you never heard of Star Wars? You know, like whatever. So finally I said, tell me your favorite show. And she said, Gilmore Girls. And I said, got it. And I went home that right night and I watched Gilmore Girls. And so
Hmm.
the next day I was like, well, it's like Lorelai, and then I quoted from it. But I was trying to make sure I think part of it was like letting her know that you're important to me, but
Yes.
then also connecting to her in that space, right?
Yes,
So
absolutely.
again, you go back to like when you're talking about career killers, career builders, it's, one of them is killers is pride, and then the other side is having discernment and who we share things with. So that's the kind of stuff we like to talk about.
I love it. I love it. So you have such a packed life professionally. How do you balance all of what you do professionally, your passions, your interests with, home life? And I think that is to your point about mental health, that is such a critical thing we need to do both as people working in the United States workforce, but also for employers to understand. So how do you balance, John?
So I think first off, it's like getting comfortable in your own skin of who you are, right? And like I'm quirky and I'm really okay with that, right? I'm just really okay with that. And I'm okay with people not being okay, like that I'm different, but like, I was telling somebody the other day and I was like, look, I don't want to play golf on a Saturday. I don't want to, whatever on a Saturday. What I want to do on a Saturday if I have free time is like daydream about writing a new book or thinking about what else we could do to help promote mental health. Like I like those subjects and like that's who I am. And
Mhm.
so being comfortable in that. So that's the first part. The second part about
Okay.
it is when I've had one major issue with clinical depression and probably 3 minor ones, but the major was really terrible. To me, I absolutely hit burnout. And so, like some people will say, to exercise to deal with mental health. Well, I ran track in college, and when I exercise, I tend to over exercise.
Mhm.
And so I've learned to kind of like have consistent movement. But I track my sleep and my
Me,
steps, and
me
I'm
too.
I'm really listen. If I see that I haven't slept well for a few nights, I'll sleep in. I'll just schedule nothing, and it could be a Tuesday morning, and I'm like, I'm sleeping in today, right? And then the last part of it is like really learning to say no. And there's lots of stuff I just turn down because I can't do it. Or if I go, I leave early. Rich Karate and I, Mayor Karate,
Yes.
he and I used to pal around a ton. And one time, I'm a name drop by the way. One time, Mayor Karate and I were at this event
I love
together,
it.
and John Huntsman was the speaker,
Mhm.
and he was like running for president or something. And so Rich Lee, he yelled me, he's like, man, let's get out of here. I'm like, well, we can't. The door is right by. We'd have to walk in front of it. You can't do that. And so Rich is like, just walk through the kitchen. And I was like, are you crazy? Dude, he got up. We walked straight through the kitchen, out the back, and left. And it was a liberating experience for me because I was like, oh, you don't have to stay 3 hours. You can go to something for 10 minutes.
Yes.
That's what I do. And then I Irish goodbye it. And so I tell people, like, I can go to your thing, but I can't stay. I'm just not, I just can't. Like it, so that's when I say I can't, I'm answering the question by that's my mental health. And, again, somebody may feel differently about that. For me to be saying I have to have time off, part of it.
Yes, I think that's really important too. That you said two things. One is being able to say no and giving yourself permission to do that. But also, what you did was say to someone, I can come, but I'll be there for just a few minutes. So you kind of
Yeah.
set the expectation that you're important to me, but I want you to know I'm important to me too. So I've got to limit that. So
And
I love that.
I will add that I sit on a lot of boards, and I'm trustee at both Bethune-Cookman and FAMU, and those meetings are really important because you have to have a quorum, and you're there and you're focused.
Right.
On other boards I sit on, sometimes people come in and say, and this happened recently, somebody on the board, I said, listen, if you want me to come guest lecture students, I'll do it. I love it. If you want me to email stuff, Zoom, whatever. If you want me at a board meeting, I have no interest. I don't want to come at all. And so some boards, that's a big deal, like they take attendance and like, I'm not your guy. So maybe I'm not a good board member. Maybe I'm just your guy that's a fun guest lecturer, right? But again,
Mhm.
that knows your strengths and your skill sets. And to
Right.
your point, it's like setting expectations. That's very important.
Yes. So what's next for you, John? You've got lots of things ahead of you. What's first and foremost in your mind as you look ahead in the next year or two?
Well, I would tell you first off that I feel like I feel more balanced than I ever have. I do just in a general sense. I try to work hard and let things go. And so I don't have any more ladders climbing like I used to have that visual. Now I don't. Somebody said the other day, it's like I like to build ladders to give out to other people, right? So I like that.
Oh,
My
I'm definitely going
daughters,
to use that one.
fun, isn't that fun? So, I've got my mom's 85, and so I check in with
Mm,
her every day. And
mhm,
my wife has had some health issues, and she's doing better, and so I'm with her all the time. And then I've got two daughters in college, and so every single day I have four ladies that I take care of in some level. And they're in all different seasons, so we're dealing with that. I
mhm.
think that professionally, I'm going to keep doing real estate deals. That's my vocation. And I think on the Crossman Career Builder stuff, it's really trying to be intentional about cool connection points, like working with you and other key people topically on things that can make impact. And so when I can find ways to partner with somebody on mental health or partner with somebody on HBCUs and that importance. So I'm not, there's no title, right? Like it's not like, well, John, do you ever want to be title? Like I don't, that's not a thing. But partnering to make impact is what I'm really trying to stay focused on.
Yes, I love the idea of us, CareerSource Central Florida, and you partnering further in the future. So, if our listeners want to find out about Career Killers, Career Builders, or see you speaking, where can they find that information online?
I'm super easy to find, annoyingly so. But so Crossman Career Builders, we have a website and we have a YouTube channel, and so there's little
Mhm.
clips of my speeches and stuff like that, so you can see them, including the one the book's based on. That entire speech is at UF. You can see that. So Crossman Career Builders on YouTube. We also have the website, so you get information on that. And I'm all over social media, so I'm very easy to find. I will tell you this is that one time I heard a pastor give a sermon, and he was talking about generosity, and this is a little snarky, but I was thinking to myself, he's not real generous with that pulpit, right? And so I try to be generous with my pulpit, right? So what I want to do with like what I have is help serve and partner and help people as much as I can. So that'd
That's
be a great
amazing
resource.
and
Yeah.
inspiring. And I feel very, very grateful that I met you and that we've had this conversation. And I look forward to so many great conversations and working together in the future, John. And I know that our listeners will really benefit from many of the ideas and observations that you have. So appreciate you. Thank you so much for being a part of our Bold Line podcast today.
Honored to be a part of it.
Thank you. Here at CareerSource Central Florida, we are always focused on being brilliant at what we do, being innovative in our solutions, leading the people who provide services in our community, and being resilient every day that we are working together with our Central Florida community. So thank you so much for listening today, and we look forward to tuning in to our next Bold Line podcast.